Welcome to Tampa Yugioh. It's been a little while since I got some content up, but then last weekend happened, and Tampa really showed out well at the Remote Duel YCS, including my guest, frequent guest, friend of the show, Nick Ortiz here, who finished 10-1 after Swiss, ended up 4th place, and then unfortunately lost in top 32. But he was on Sky Striker, and Nick, you've been like the Sky Striker guy for the longest time. How long? You've been playing it basically since release day, right?
So I played Invoke Sky Striker right when it came out in like May, but by the time August hit, I think I fully committed to Pure Strikers. That's August 2018. So yeah, since about then, so almost 3 years now.
Wow. Like, were you on it before YCS Dallas, or was that?
YCS Dallas of 2018?
Yeah, the one where we were both trying to make Invoked work.
I don't think I was. Yeah, I think it might have been right around there when I made the switch.
Yeah, you've pretty much been dedicated to it, and so you must have been really excited whenever the ban list came out and you saw Engage was back. So,
yeah,
go ahead. What?
I was gonna say, even when Engage got banned, I saw Kagari to 3, and I was like, "Yo, 3 Kagari, that's insane!" And then 2-3 Anchor, and then like nothing for like half a year. But yeah, when Engage came back. It was super unexpected. I honestly expected to play something like Pure Zodiac or I don't know, something even like Prank Kids going into this next format. But then I saw Engage go to 1, and it's like, how can I not play this deck? I have my best card back.
Yeah, how much? Before we kind of get into your list, which I know has been released for a little while now, there's some other videos you can watch that will probably just give you the list a lot better than what we're going to do. We're going to really go in depth on the card choices, matchups, how the tournament went for you. But how much do you think the experience that you have with the deck played into your success?
So Striker is very much a deck where half the battle is before round 1 starts. So Striker, you have about like 18 or 19 cards that you play in your main deck that are Sky Striker related. And then you have about another like 6 or 7 that are like kind of mandatory, like Rhoda, Upstart, Terraforming, stuff like that. And those last 15 cards is what really can make or break your event. Hand trap choices for Striker is very important because when you're playing Striker, you have to play every single game. So that seems straightforward at first, but when you're thinking of a deck like, I don't know, like Tri-Brigade, which can get their whole engine started off 1 card, just like a fractal effect dump. Or you're looking at a deck like Dryatron, where if your combo resolves, you're going to win the game. You're not going past turn 3. For Striker, you don't have either. You don't have a 1-card engine that gets to your like ideal end board, or just lets you starting playing off just 1 card. I mean, Ray helps, but Ray isn't like your entire engine. And then it's not something like Triatron where you end on like 6 or 7 negates. So you have to play for 4, 5, 6 turns against your opponent. So when you're making hand trap choices or even like small niche striker choices, like how many specific striker cards you're playing, you can't think of just like turn 1. You have to think of like turn 3, turn 4. Is this hand trap good past my first turn? Is this hand trap good on like turn 3? Is this hand trap going to be good game 2 versus game 1? So it's all those small things. And when you get, going back to your original question, of when you start playing the deck for a long time, you can kind of get what kind of cards and what kind of hand traps fit in certain metas. So by playing the deck for so long, I can kind of understand what kind of hand traps need to be played for these kind of decks that, okay, these decks are similar to the decks that were played last year or similar to decks that were played 2 years ago. And you think, okay, what hand traps were good against those decks at that point? And you have to kind of compile all of that into your list. And then once you get those solid 70 cards down, that's when you start playing. And then that's when you need to figure out, okay, these hand traps are good in these matchups. I expect that I'm going to be playing these decks at this time. And then all of that kind of compiles into just like what Striker is really as an archetype.
A nice manifesto. The Striker manifesto.
The Striker manifesto.
Well, I mean, I'm interested to get into the list just because of everything you just said, and I know that you know this deck really well. You've put a ton of thought into it. I mean, you've made it work in formats where it probably shouldn't have worked, and with lists that, anybody else would have thought. It just didn't look right. So I'm excited to see, kind of the choices you made. So
sure.
I'm going to pull up the deck list here on the screen. And so let's just start with the most obvious card, Ray. 3 Ray. I mean, I think that's basically what you have to do these days, right? That's your starter. That's your, kind of, what is there anything else about Ray that kind of people don't normally think about looking at the card? Like,
that's a good question. With the Ray is just one of those cards that it's a means to an end, right? You basically winning all of your games with Striker with your spells, with Anchor or Cannon or, Engage, Afterburner, those cards. Those cards are what get you your advantage, right? But advantage doesn't mean anything if you can't kill your opponent. So, Ray is there because it's the only card in your deck that can reduce your opponent's life to 0, basically. So I can open all of these like disruption cards, but if I can't even if I'm like +3 on my opponent, if I don't have a card like Ray to get my engine going, it's just not good. And I think the addition of Rose kind of puts Ray in a different perspective now and makes you see like how powerful Ray's quick effect tribute has been over the years. So when you look at, Ray ever since it really came out, being able to dodge all these kinds of random interruptions that your opponent might have over these years to ensure that your engine starts has just been like really, I don't want to say underrated because a lot of people do understand its power, but it's just coming to light, like especially for this event or even last format with something like Hieratic Dragon of Spheres, right? Or something like Revolt, when just being able to just respond to your normal summon, and when you have something like Rose or Hornet Drones, and then you're just losing because you don't have a follow-up, is really disheartening. Where it's like, if my opponent revolts me, they're not going to do it on a Ray normal because I can just chain, I can keep my stuff going. So yeah, Ray is just it's like one of those like iconic cards for the deck that I feel like has just only really gotten better as the years have gone by.
Yeah. So how important do you feel like stopping the Ray? Is Ray like the card that should have a big target on its back when you're playing against this deck?
I think it depends on the matchup. That's one phrase that might be said a lot in this video because at the end of the day, like a lot of your plays just differ depending on what your opponent is playing and what you're playing. When you're playing something like the mirror match, like using Solemn Warning or Solemn Strike on either a Ray effect or a Link summon, can sometimes just end your opponent's turn, right? Especially when you only really have 6 cards, you don't have too many extenders past the Ray normal. But yeah, like a counter trap, summon negate, or something like Herald of Ultimateness negating a special summon can hurt the deck a lot, which is why you have to rely on your Widow Anchors, your Mind Controls, your Impermanences, your Mystic Minds, just ensure that the Ray goes off.
So moving on to the 2 rows, I know that this was a card where when it was first announced, people weren't really all that on it. They were kind of like, this doesn't really do all that much. What's changed that's made this like an essential part of the deck now?
So the best way to look at Rose, I see it as an overall worse Ray that has some niche applications that Ray does not have. So a lot of the times Rose is just a Ray that doesn't have a quick effect tag out. But when you have 1 engage, you lost 2 starters, right? So prior to engage coming back into the game, I played 3 Rose a lot of the time just because you need as many starters as you can in this deck. So, when you have 3 Rose, 3 Ray, that's about like 8 or 9 pre-engage. But now that engage is back, you can cut the Rose back by 1, I think. And one thing I really like about Rose is it's something that becomes better as the game goes on, right? While something like Ray is good in your hand turn 1, Rose is something that past like turn 2 or turn 3, it just gradually starts becoming better, like up to like the effect of Ray. When I'm at like turn 5, I want a Rose in my hand. I don't want a Ray in my hand. And when you have a Rose in the graveyard, like late game, your Afterburner just becomes a starter now, being able to summon itself back to the field. And another like super niche application that comes up a lot, especially in like big like combo decks that end on a big board, is Rose can just chain block Kagari. So, you know, my list specifically isn't playing Eagle Booster, which might change in the future, but for this event specifically, I never really found myself a need to have Booster because my Kagari just almost always resolved. Whether it be like Chainlink 1 Kagari, target engage, Chainlink 2 Rose, my opponent can't bell me, my opponent can't Apollosa me, my opponent can't Savage me. There's so many, they can't Gamma me. There's so many different things that they just can't do because of the Rose application there. And then one small application is it really complements Zeke, where, you know, the Zeke banish effect came up quite a few times for this event, whether banishing like a Tri-Brigade Link 3 so that it comes back on their end phase, and then I can anchor it, and then I just need another monster, and that's an access code with 5300 attack. And then having a Rose being able to trigger there, summoning itself again to be used as either Area 0 fuel or, you know, Multirole fuel. Just those two cards working in tandem, it adds a cool little like layer and dimensions to the deck. And particularly in the Sky Striker matchup, Rose is a card I want to get into my graveyard as quickly as possible. Because if you're a turn player and you Afterburner an opponent's Link monster, your Rose is going to negate their right to get summoned out. So previously in the mirror match, you could just never attack over an opponent's monster unless if you had a Shark Cannon. Now, if I have a Rose in my graveyard, I can attack over my opponent's monster. I can use a Rose. I can banish. I can negate their effects. I can attack over it, especially if I have a Shizuku, and then the Rose can just attack over the Ray. And it's really good as an extender to bring out Zeke, which if you negate or if you banish a Sky Striker Link monster in the mirror match, it comes back in the main monster zone. So lore-wise, it's kind of cool because like Zeke and Rose are like the antithesis to like the Striker stuff, and they like hard counter some of the Striker cards despite being in the deck in itself. So I think the mirror match is a lot more intricate now, and if that was even possible. And I think like adding those cards is really cool.
So kind of speaking, you mentioned a couple of choices you made, and you know, the idea of the mirror match. Before we go any further, when you were putting this list together, what were you expecting to play against?
Sure. So I expected the three most represented decks going into this format, or this event specifically, was going to be Tri-Brigade and all of its variants, Drytron, and I thought Striker was going to be pretty represented too. Now, I don't think Striker was going to be, you know, particularly good because if there's a high representation rate for Striker, but historically has a very bad conversion rate. Just because you have to play so many games honestly compared to other decks that a lot of people just aren't equipped to do that. So I didn't really build my deck around the mirror match that much because I felt that I could take it over the top against most players who play this deck. So I built it mainly for Drytron and Tri-Brigade. And I think that that's very reflective in my hand trap choice and some other small tech cards that I have here. If you want to go into the hand traps now, we can, or we can wait for a little bit longer. But judging by those three decks and how I felt those three would be the most represented, I built my mains and side and extra for those three specific matchups.
Let's stay on the Striker part of the deck just for a minute and kind of clear that out. Obviously, the one engage. How much does that change the way the deck plays?
0 to 1 engage is so much different from 3 to 1 engage. Now that I've been able to experience all three, 1 engage basically makes Multirole like a playable card. And if anybody's played Striker last year, if you were a masochist, it's that Multirole just really wasn't that good of a card. Because even when you had 3 Anchor or 3 Cannon, your problem was you just never really wanted to search Multirole. You didn't want to dump it off Hayate and then grab it off Kagari. And you didn't really want to search it off Shizuku. The Multirole only ever came up at like turn 3, unless if you hard opened it. Where when you have something like Engage now, you can dump the Engage and you can search roll, and then that lets you stabilize your field a lot better because you have an additional spell engrave. You have engage in the graveyard to recur multiple times next turn. And the end phase Shizuku set becomes a lot better because you have the engage and grave from later. So an absolute last resort can be an engage set and then activating it on your turn. Additionally, engage being at 1 basically means that all the 1-of striker spells you're playing are double the amount now. So, yes, multi-roll is limited, but because engage is also at 1 now, I'm playing twice the amount of multi-rolls I once was, which means multi-roll in area 0 becomes a more relevant combo than it previously did. Previously, you kind of just had to pray that area 0 resolved because you almost never really had multi-roll to work with. But now you have such easy access to multi-roll that it makes your consistency of the deck increase, which if you look at something like in the OCG, when they have only 1 Kagari and they only have 2 engage, and they only have 2 in anchor, they have 3 multi-roll. So the deck's consistency over in Japan is a lot better than it is here. And just the 1 engage addition really, really helps that. And now looking just to engage as the card effect in and of itself of the bonus draws. I mean, yeah, I drew plenty of hand traps off the bonus draw many times this tournament, which is ridiculous. When you're playing 14 hand traps, you're going to draw. Oh, you're definitely going to draw quite a few with the bonus draw for there. But it's kind of crazy how the addition of just 1 card, even as 1-of, just completely shapes the way a deck can function. It kind of goes to show how important of a card and how powerful of a card engage was, particularly in pure. So, having it back into the game just made Striker go from a meme deck to something that you can take to an event. And if you play competently, you can do well in.
Yeah, and I think I'm just the sheer power of engage. I think everybody knew going into it that it was going to make the deck playable again.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of people were saying it's going to be the best deck. Yeah, which I don't know if that bears out. I mean, I think a lot of people are saying it has the highest skill ceiling, which I think I could probably agree with. I think a good player can get more out of that card than just about anybody. Hold on, we got to take a breath for a second.
Sure.
Morgan's talking right next to us.
It's going to be beneficial for Kristen because they're trying to come up with something that will automatically send her a list of upcoming originals. And they're
Not
planning
looking
to
in a
gather,
consistent direction.
their starting point would be to gather that information from
I feel like I need to start looking into the camera.
So when we continue the list, are we just going from top left to right?
That's what I was doing. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And I probably, some of these can be more abbreviated too. I just think that it's a good opportunity to discuss the intricacies of the deck and how it plays, which I don't know if that's really been done recently.
Recently definitely not.
Yeah, there's not really any good guides out there.
I know there are memes of wow, this is a 2.5 when Johnny Lee did his 2.5 hour Draco Sky profile. Everyone was memeing on him, being it's Striker. Do you really need to go in depth? Well, something that I noticed is that there aren't many in-depth videos on Striker. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of videos on deck lists and stuff, but nothing beyond Engage is a good card. It gives you good draws. Anchor is a good card. It takes a monster. It's no one really goes into okay, why are these cards particularly in Striker good and against these matchups? Matchup X, matchup Y, matchup Z.
Like the classic deck profile. It's broken. It's broken. It's broken. This card sucks. It's broken. It's broken.
Yeah. I played 2. I wish I played 3.
Yeah.
You have to play 3 of this.
That's great, but it doesn't really get into the actual need of it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let's see. I'll put myself back over here.
Yes. And I'll ping you the name.
I thought she was. Yeah, we're gonna be free until 3:30.
Contact with me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the unfortunate part of having desks right next to each other.
Yeah. So I just.
So what are you planning on doing now that you're done with school?
If it was okay.
Good question. So I am currently in the job hunt for something related to my degree. The main places I'm looking at right now are Tallahassee, DC, and something like Dallas or Austin. Are probably like my 3 big spots to go. You know, I haven't really started job searching since July, just because, you know, I graduated in May, but I wanted like the last 2 months just to, you know, I truly have nothing to do. I always had something looming over my head at some point. So, you know, going into this month and the next month, I'm going to try and find, you know, something to do.
So they're just trying to figure out
hopefully start working by like September.
Yugioh system is updated.
Yeah. So poli-sci, right? You finished.
Political science and Asian international studies.
That's a good one. I have a friend who took I think he minored in poli-sci, but he majored in Chinese because he wants
That's
to
hard.
do. Yeah,
That's hard.
He wanted to do CIA, like work for intelligence, like investigating China or like whatever, spying on China or whatever it is.
I did a Japanese minor, and that was rough. I can't imagine taking like an Eastern or like an Asian language as like a major, because it's just so like fundamentally different.
Yeah,
I looked into it, and like the credit requirements for like a major in like an Asian language is ridiculous. It was like 30 more credits than like political science, and I was like, why?
Yeah, and his homework was crazy too. Like he was showing me, I was like, I don't even know what you're doing. Yeah, it's like it's crazy.
Oh yeah, I had my own fair share of like kanji exercises like every day. Thankfully, that's over and done with now.
Yeah. Oh man, how does it feel?
Mixed feelings.
Well,
on one hand, I'm really glad that it's all over. It's, you know, a 4-year grind. But on the other hand, it's like
I don't know why
the first times in my life when I didn't really when I don't truly have direction.
And you and
you know, I was like, oh, I have to go to school. I'm going to high school to go to college. I'm taking these classes to graduate from college. I've done that now. And it's just like, okay, I truly have like.
I'll put this
all harnesses are off. There's people that can push me towards the way, but you know, it's not like a true correct direction to go right now. So it's something
tag you in it, and then they're like, and you're surprised.
Yeah, that's it never gets any easier. So don't.
Yeah.
What about you? Have you been the past 5-6 months?
Good. I've got. Now that the economy is kind of opening back up, I'm getting a lot of calls, a lot of like inquiries, and I've put in some pretty big bids recently on like video or social media stuff. I just actually like right before this, I met with a guy
and I think they're just
over the phone. And then I actually I've been doing some volunteering with the Hillsborough County Democratic Party.
Okay, cool.
Like I reached out to them and I was like, hey, how can I help? And they need a lot of social media help. Like they don't really have a plan or anything. So I've been helping with that. And there's a chance I might be able to get, they had somebody, the lady who does the PR now donated like a ton of money for them to hire somebody to work on that. So I'm trying to get them to basically become a client of my business so I can like do their social media stuff, get paid for it. And like, you know, that stuff, that would be pretty big. If I could get it, it would basically double my income.
Oh, that's really good. Okay.
Yeah. So
if you have like a ballpark percentage on whether you think they're going to be a client, can you have one?
I'd say, I'd say nearly 100%. It's just will I be able? How much control will I have over the job, the scope of work, and pay and all that stuff? But they literally asked me, and they're like, if not you, we want somebody like you. And so I was like, well, yeah, I'm very interested. Let's see what we can work out. So that could be really good. But, your call, babe.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. All right. Let's get back in it. So we were on Engage.
Yeah.
I think you kind of covered Multirole already. So I'll kind of, I don't know. Let's just see what we do. Sure. So Hornet drones. I mean, that's pretty much. It's always been a feature of the engine. Does it come up as often when you have 5 names, or is that just kind of an extender to go for game?
Hornet drones has always been, I think, the most like controversial and divisive striker card just because the existence of it has facilitated so many other decks to play this archetype as an engine and not its dedicated deck. I mean, if I could, I would just wish drones never existed and then have the other cards gradually come back into the game. But drones is one of those cards where it's nice to have when you have the engage already engraved. So previously, when you had 3 engage, you used to always set an engage off roll, then search 1 off Shizuku, so you have a follow-up for next turn. But because the engage is at 1, you really only want to set engage off roll if you're either going for game next turn or you need the engage. So when you have the engage out of the deck and you don't have a Ray in your hand, you want to ensure that you have a follow-up for next turn. So Hornet Drone, just by nature of being a spell card, you just search it as a follow-up for next turn. It's probably the weakest out of Ray, Rose, and drones, where drones, there's never really a time where I'm upset that drones is in my hand, but it's like you play it because you have to, because it's a striker name, because it gets your engine going. It's the weakest one that gets your engine going, but it gets it going nonetheless. And then from there, you can either dump an actual monster off Hayate and keep going from there. Being able to add it back off Kagari if either your engage gets banished somehow or it's still in the grave, or to, play around something like a Ghost Bell where, they might not want to bell you if you're targeting drones, but they will bell you if you're targeting engage. Applications like that. But at the end of the day, it's just there because you need to play it.
Mm-hmm. So Multirole, you already kind of touched on the fact that it wasn't really viable without engage. Mm-hmm. Do you find that how often, I guess let me put it this way, what's the primary function of the card? Resource management or the secondary effect?
So I would say roll is there to essentially close the game out. If I'm at a position where I'm resolving multi-roll for pretty much any amount that's not turn 1, I'm pretty much winning that game. Mm-hmm. A lot of people liken multi-roll to Spellbook of Judgment, and I think while the card does have many of its similarities to that card, it has weaknesses in it that Judgment didn't necessarily have. So when you look at something like multi-roll compared to something like Judgment, the amount of potential cards that could proc Judgment in spellbooks during that time was a lot more than something like multi-roll, where Judgment was any spell card period, and you played more spellbook cards than you play striker cards. Where something like multi-roll, the reason why it wasn't very good, in my opinion, when Engage was banned, was because it doesn't do anything on its own. It ensures that you're winning the game by recycling resources you've already seen throughout the game. So if I've already resolved an Anchor and a Cannon and an Afterburner or an Eagle Booster if you're playing it, or Area Zero, all of these cards, and I'm getting them all back, that means all of those cards either completely resolved or they did their intended function. So roll is just getting them back for me. So if I have roll on the field and I'm resolving roll, it basically solidifies. It's like the final nail in the coffin, where if I have roll up against pretty much any deck, I gain all of my advantage back and I win the game. I have that one big power turn. But you can only really have that power turn if you're in a winning position already. So something like multi-roll, I don't like opening that card unless if I have cards that complement it really well. Something like Area Zero, something like Ray or Engage or Hornet Drones. Cards that are starters where I'm already applying pressure on my opponent with my striker activations, and then I'm getting them all back at the end of my turn. And then roll just, again, as its consistency booster to Area Zero on its ability to become a starter to summon a striker back from the deck is really good in applications there. And something about roll with the not responding to effect. That effect rarely happens outside of like proccing Area Zero, but it's very memorable because when it triggers or when the striker player uses it, they're going for a big push and then you're immediately dying. So if I go like multi-roll effect and then after that I just Twin Twister you, and I Twin Twister away your Revolt and I don't know, like a Solemn Strike, You know, the Tri-Brigade player is going to come out of that game being like, oh, Multirole's broken. This is a dumb card. I can't respond to my cards. Where I'm coming at the perspective of like, Roll's already on the field. It already resolved. I'm probably already going to win the game here. And this just solidifies that. My Twin Twister is going to resolve. Or my Pot of Desires is going to resolve. If I'm going Engage and you can't respond to it, I either open to roll Engage, which should like almost never happen, or it's like turn 3 and I already have 3 spells in grave. I'm probably already up 1 or 2 cards, and I already have roll on the field with Engage. It didn't matter if you had Ash. You're going to lose that game regardless. So it's the, I can't really think of an analogy, but it's kind of, it puts everything together. Roll for the entire engine. It's also my favorite striker artwork of all the striker cards.
Oh yeah, the diving.
Yeah, the blues look really nice in it.
So let me ask you this: if somebody wants to beat this deck, is Roll the card they should have like their eye on targeting down, or is that just kind of a red herring?
I think in particularly the mirror match, you should heavily target Multirole, because the mirror match is a little bit of an exception, because in the mirror match, a lot of your disruption cards also act as starters. It is very, very difficult to brick in the mirror match because your anchors are starters. Your shark cannons are starters. There are so many different things that are starters against that matchup where you're just never bricking. So when you have something like Multirole, Multiroles can trigger 3 or 4 times in a match and it's still not completely decided because your opponent's deck is as consistent as yours. So when you're playing the mirror match, you absolutely have to prioritize Multirole because you want to get that online as quickly as possible. Turn 2 or turn 1 at the earliest you want it. Against something, if you're playing something like Tri-Brigade or you're playing something like Salamangreat, while it's probably good to stop the Multirole, I think that there are other cards or other things that you should play that stop my deck quicker. Something like Anti-Spell or Imperial Order. Or even something like a Solemn Strike, I feel a lot of the times is better than something like a Ghost Ogre. Because like the best way for those decks to beat me is to stop me from playing. Because my deck, if it plays and your deck plays, I strongly feel that my deck is always going to beat yours. Because my deck can play longer and it has better cards than yours on average. The big problem with Striker is there are a lot of cards that just absolutely blow you out. So you should build your deck, if you're the non-Striker player, to play those blowout cards against my deck. If you're trying to play fair with me and you're trying to play honest with me, my cards are just better than yours, so I'm going to beat you.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like it's just I think you hit the nail on the head. The fairness, I think, is what I always think about. Like you have to put them in an unfair game state, which I think is why Drytron tends to be a harder matchup.
Yes.
If they go off, just because it's like how does Striker play through a Herald with like 3 or 4 negates? You know,
Strikers. Famously, Strikers' most difficult matchups have been decks that are faster than it. If a deck is as fast or slower than you, you will always have the advantage. But when you have decks like Drytron, or historically decks like Dragon Link, or something like Danger Thunder, those decks can just overwhelm you before you can get to your turn 3 or your turn 4. So for Striker, you need to build your deck against those kinds of decks. Because if you're trying to build your deck against matchups where you win if you keep playing, I think you're coming at it wrong because that's not your deck's function. Your deck should already beat those. You shouldn't play more cards that are particularly good in only those matchups. If you wanted to play a card that's specifically good in other matchups, you should play the ones that are good against those big combo decks, those big decks that you can have trouble dealing with, which is why I'm playing something like Nibiru that we'll go through later, where like Nibiru might not be good in those slow decks, but Nibiru is really good against the decks that Striker is bad in.
Let's move on to the Afterburners. I noticed you played 2 of that. Traditionally, it seems like 1. What's the rationale behind the 2?
So the primary reason that I am playing 2 Afterburner is because I am playing 3 Desires in this build specifically.
Okay.
I have been playing 1 for a while in initial testing, but one thing that I found is if I activated Desires and I played the 1 burner and I banished it, it wasn't like banishing Engage, it wasn't like banishing Roll. But there are times when you really just need to out a back row, or there are times when you really just want to out a monster and you don't want to take it. So having the 2nd burner in there basically ensures that you'll have it in your deck post Desires. This deck isn't main decking any back row removal except Afterburner, which I feel is correct because I don't think a lot of decks right now are playing deck cards that you need to remove game one that are back row. They're either playing chainable cards like Revolt, or they're not playing any back row at all, or they're playing things like, I don't know, like Schism or Punishment, which aren't really good against you to begin with. The 2-burner is really good in that respect. Additionally, going second, 2-burner I feel is very good because it helps disrupt your opponent. You know, worst case scenario, it's like a Soul Taker, right? It just it's good spot removal. That's also a striker spell. Like, it puts another name in the grave. So, you know, in a going first build or in a build that doesn't play Desires, I would probably recommend playing just the 1-burner. But I feel that, you know, 2-burner in this build specifically, I felt was the correct number. And there were plenty of times throughout the day where I banished 1-burner off Desires, and I was really glad I had the second one in my deck.
So, see 2 area 0. You mentioned that. So how do you use this card? I mean, it's primarily in the past it's been used to see Ray. Are you using it as more of a resource card now, or is it still the Ray function primarily?
I don't think the function of Area 0 has changed much throughout the 3 years that the deck's been out. You know, you're essentially playing 3 because of terraforming. And it's there because it can get you to Ray. It can get you to more consistent areas. Again, it complements multi-role. Now that engages at 1, you're playing double the roles. Area 0 becomes significantly better. Area 0 was also really, really bad when engage was at 0, because not only could you not consistently do it with roll, that was also 1 less striker spell that you would hit off of it. There's no feeling worse than whiffing off an Area 0. So it's there as a consistency boost, and its additional effect to summon a striker out of your deck is really good for not just the multi-role pop, but also for something like Afterburners. Afterburners can pop your own spells and traps. So you have, with this deck specifically, you have a lot of really cool 1- and 2-card interactions that can get you to your plays and that can disrupt your opponent. One of them being is the Afterburner pop when you have 3 or more spells engraved to pop the Area 0 to also trigger to get a Ray out. It's all those small things that you, like, while you truly only have like 8 or 9 like true Rays through like the Rhoda, the Ray, the Rose, Horner Drones, those kind of cards, you have so many different like 1- and 2-card interactions that can get you to Ray also, to where this deck's consistency is a little bit more than you would think at first, and Area 0 helps with that.
So triple anchor, I mean, I think that speaks for itself. It's like the best of the cards to search. You know, and it has like the most flexible application of everything else in the deck. Is there anything, you know, anything you've noticed in this particular meta game that anchor does that it didn't do before?
Yeah, so just being, a lot of decks right now are playing links again, whether that be, you know, spheres, you know, Omen, the Tri-Brigade Link 3 also, these small things like Link Rebo or things like IP. Being able to anchor take and having access to a card like Accesscode Talker now not only gives you really quick OTK access, but also just can pop 4 or 5 cards in your opponent's field easily. So Anchor helps facilitate that. And while Anchor has always been like the primary form of disruption for Striker, going first and going second, being able to either stop your opponent and then take the monster for an entire turn, or then taking an opponent's monster and then using it for like a link summon or whatever. At the end of the day, Anchor as the most important form of like disruption for Striker. I don't know. It's been 3 years. I just feel Anchor has always. It's just one of those cards where I don't know. Almost at loss for words. It's funny.
Yeah, there's. I mean, it's one of those cards where if you just read it, you're like, I get it. Yeah, but I like your point about you know, it boosts the speed of the deck a lot when you have those link ratings that you can steal. Yeah, and all of a sudden you're able to end the game on turn 2 or 3 that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. And I think Shark Cannon's probably used just about the same way, right? You're using it as like a push, make your plays bigger.
Yeah, so Shark Cannon at 3 is a little bit more niche than Anchor at 3, I think. A lot of people have been on 2 for a while. And my reasoning behind playing 3 is that if I were playing 2 and I had Powder Desires and I banished one of them, I'm only having 1 Shark Cannon for the rest of the game, which isn't the best feeling in the world. You don't really want to add back Shark Cannon with Kagari. And if it's your only shark cannon, you really don't want to set it off multi-roll. So having 3 is really good there. And because engage is at 1, you can't consistently get to primary forms of interruption as you were normally able to do with the 3 engage. So you want to maximize those kind of disruption cards you could have in your deck, something like 3 anchor and 3 cannon, so that if they either make you go first or you don't want to engage for a starter and not a disruption card, you want to open those cards in your hand to be able to disrupt your opponent. Additionally, Ken is really good in very specific matchups right now, particularly in Dryatron, to banish the Dryatrons out of the graveyard. It's really good in the mirror. It's good against Salad. And at first, you wouldn't think it's very good against Tri-Brigade. And I will agree with you, like turn 1 and even turn 2, it's not particularly good in that matchup. But one really interesting thing is that you can Shark Cannon Omen and it triggers to banish a card. So it's very much like a ding effect. So, if I banish something with Omen, even if I, link it away and get a search, I don't really care. I'm either making a Zeeg and then banishing it, or I'm making an access code with a link 4 to kill you. And like being able to ding an Orcus player every single turn, if I Omen you every single turn, it doesn't matter if you're adding monsters back to you from your deck to your hand. If I'm Omening you every single turn as a Shark Cannon and not an Anchor, you're just not going to win that game. Because at that point, I'm taking spot removal disruption of taking your monster and Shark Cannon of non-targeting removal of banishing a card. And it's just very difficult for a deck, like a slowish deck like Tri-Brigade to deal with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I know that was kind of a more offbeat tech choice you made, was to do the 3. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many other people were doing that. I didn't see any of the other deck profiles. Mm-hmm. So Triple Desires, I mean, I feel like just the deck's a little bit slower. You need the extra cards.
Yeah, so you wouldn't think that, with 1 engage and 1 roll, that Desires would be correct to play. And I would tend to disagree in the respect of, you look at the deck like Salamangreat, and it only has 1 Gazelle and it only has 1 Circle, but they also still play Desires. Why? Because 1, the Gazelle is very easy to search out, and 2, if you don't open a playable hand, you're fine taking the risk of banishing that card, that really important one of, because if you draw into playable cards, it doesn't matter if you banish those other cards because you weren't going to play regardless.
Right.
So I can very easily dump an engage, or I can dump a multi-roll and then resolve Desires, so that I'm not banishing those power cards. Or conversely, I'm activating Desires, and if I banish engage or I banish roll, that means I didn't have array to begin with, which means, if that Desires didn't get me to array, I'm going to lose that game anyway. Whereas, at least I'll have a chance if I draw a starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So then we've got our put spells in grave cards, increase consistency, so it's Terraforming, Upstart, Rhoda. 1 Mystic Mind, that's interesting. For in blind second, and my instinct would be you would be on 3.
Yeah, so I've been having a love-hate relationship with Mystic Mind the past 2 years, ever since it's been out, where I think my stance on it has been solidified to, if Mystic Mind is your win condition of your deck, you should play 3. If you cannot beat a matchup without resolving Mind, then you should play 3 copies of that card. So with Engage banned, when it was, you can justify playing 3 copies of that card because that was really the only way you could win the game. But now that you have 1 Engage, you can be able to play really honest against your opponent, to a point where you don't need to see Mine every game. The one big disadvantage that Mine has over other spell cards is that it's a field spell, where you can't really get it in your graveyard as a spell count, right? It's going to be there as your final play if you're playing 3, because that's the card you want to resolve. When you only have 1, on the other hand, or with the Terraforming, so you're essentially playing 2, you can either see your hand and be like, can I out my opponent's board? And will this Mine, is it necessary or no? If it's not necessary, then you can start with Mine to force activations out that way and then beat your opponent with the striker cards. Or conversely, you can use all of your striker cards first to force your opponent to have interactions there and then resolve the Mine.
Right.
When I think because of that specific game state, Mine isn't really needed at any more than 1. Especially with a lot of people playing Order right now. You can't just deck your opponent out with Mine. That's just not possible. So you do have to win eventually with striker cards. But I felt the 1 Mine against particularly something like Drytron or Tri-Brigade. While Tri-Brigade, it's an auto win because they don't really have any main deck removal besides Order. For Drytron, if I'm getting a turn, I'm winning the game anyway. So mine could essentially be any card there, right? Because if the difference between 1 and 6 cards in my hand against Drytron is meaningless because they could just get 5 negates or whatever. Whereas like, if I have 2 hand traps to stop my opponent, that means they didn't end on ultimateness, which means that this mine is going to win me the game regardless, but I'm playing anyway, so I should just win without the mine.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, to me, I always think of it as like, that's like the unfair win condition that Striker can muster.
Yeah.
It's like, you can just drop mine and just be like, what are you going to do? I win, you know, like, but it sounds like what you're saying is the current meta is not structured in such a way where that works on more than one deck. Or, you know, obviously there's rogue decks, but like, it's that's not reliable. That makes sense. And
mine's a pretty easy side out games 2 and 3 because your opponent is heavily expecting those kinds of cards. So they're going to side things like Storm, Twister, Cosmic, and Duster. So I almost always side out mine post board. Just because if they make me go first, mine isn't very good. It's just pretty much a dead card. And if they go second, they can prepare for it. So there's only like 1 or 2 specific matchups where I keep it in post board.
So mind control, this is kind of your tech for the weekend too.
Yeah.
Didn't work out as well.
When I drew mind control, it was good. So my thought process behind mind control is against something specific, against specifically Tri-Brigade. If my opponent ends on the whole like Apollosa, set 2, one of them being Revolt, I can start off with mind control, take the Apollosa, and then just like prevent my opponent from playing. Because then I have an Apollosa on my field. If they want to Revolt, they're just not getting nearly as much advantage anymore. They're losing their Apollosa because I'm going to link it away anyway. Against Drytron, it's a force negate. I can just take anything that I need to. Those kinds of thoughts in my head made me think that binding control would be good. And it was when I saw it. But the problem is it was an unsearchable one of where it comes up very rarely. I think I only ever opened binding control maybe like 5 times throughout the tournament of like, 12 rounds. So in the future, will this change? Currently, I'm testing Ego Booster. If you notice, I'm not playing it. I think Ego Booster in a blind second deck isn't very good for this very specific purpose of you want all of your disruption cards to be proactive. You want proactive disruption. Things like Anchor to force a negate. Things like Mind Control to force a negate. Desires force a negate. Afterburner forces negate. Where something like Ego Booster is a reactive disruption. It doesn't do anything on its own unless if your opponent is trying to respond to one of your effects. And while that is good in a build designed to go first, when you're going second, you don't really want a card like that. You want a card that proactively beats your opponent's board. So I'm always kind of iffy on Booster, but is it better than Mind Control? The fact that Ego Booster has Sky Striker in the name might make me think it is for the niche applications of either setting it off a Shizuku, activating it, and then setting it off Multirole for things like that. But I didn't include it for this event because I thought, I'm never searching this card off Engage. I'm never dumping it off Hayate, and I'm almost never searching it off Shizuku. So I never really saw it like ever being relevant. So that at that point, I'm thinking like, okay, hard opening Booster versus hard opening Mind Control. And I think that was probably the wrong way to think about it. So it might be different in the future, but I'm still testing with it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Because by choosing to go second, somebody who played Mech Knight Invoked a lot, you're putting the whole burden of the game on yourself. Like you're taking an inherent disadvantage in order to end the game quickly on your own terms.
Yeah.
So I guess I could see that how, and especially like looking at this list with that in mind, that's definitely how you built it. There are very few cards that depend on your opponent to do something. You're mostly playing with yourself. So now we get to one of the biggest parts of the deck, hand traps. So how did you said 14, how did you kind of arrive at these?
I took a page out of your book. I used math for my deck ratios here. At the PPG, I played 13. At the PPG, I played 3 Imperm, 3 Valor, 3 Ash, 1 Bell, and 3 Nib, for a total of 13. Because at first I thought, 13 hand traps put you at about a 53% chance to open 2. And I felt that if I open 2 hand traps against any deck in the format right now, I should win the game.
Mm-hmm.
So after that event, I was thinking to myself, if that's the case, why am I not just playing more hand traps?
Mm-hmm.
So then on 14, the math goes up a little bit. You're at about like a 58 to 60% chance to see 2. But anything more than 14, I felt like that I was getting diminishing returns. At that point, I was bricking a little bit more. I was drawing too many hand traps for turn, which isn't super, super good. There's a lot of those little things that made me come to the point where 14's fine. That's like a 90% chance of opening 1, which against any deck except Drytron, that's a duff. And then, and specifically Drytron, a 60% chance, that means I'm winning the game more than I'm losing a little bit of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt that 14 was good. Onto the specific ratio here, I think Valor has to be played because you're playing the Accesscode package.
Right.
And I think Monster Negation this format is really good because you get to hit the Dryatronic C. You get to hit all of the Tri-Brigade ignition effects. Valor isn't super good in the mirror, but Imperm's pretty good there. You've got something like Salamangre preventing a Gazelle dump a trap, because at that point they're just playing like with monsters, which you can beat anyway. So I really like triple Valor, triple Imperm. Ash is just Ash, right? Generically
It's
good.
everything in some way.
Really good against the Shaddoll Invoke matchup. That matchup, while I didn't play it at all during the tournament, it's one of those matchups where you need to play very correctly and very safe, or you're just going to lose the game. And Ash helps you fight that. In that matchup, you should never really end on a Shizuku, which has its own problems, right? You're not getting a follow-up for next turn, which means you have to play with specifically the cards you have in your hand. But Ash is like a cheat code to that, where if I open Ash, I can end on Shizuku because I can Ash the Shaddoll Fusion. Because if my opponent resolves Shaddoll Fusion and sends from the deck, I lose. That's too much advantage, and I just can't beat that. And then the Bell-Nib ratios have been swapped as opposed to 2 weeks ago. That's because I found that I thought Tri-Brigade was going to be a more represented deck than something that Nib isn't normally good against. And I found I was playing 14 hand traps. That's a pretty high percentage of drawing 1 for turn. When against the Tri-Brigade matchup specifically, drawing Bell for turn is not bad because you can hit a Revolt on your turn. And Revolt, I felt, was like the only card that you were really concerned about, because Revolt is like a +2 if it resolves, right? All the other cards just don't really do much, or like should scare that has like Striker-esque levels of advantage. So Bell just being able to completely shoot that down is something that I really liked, and something that I thought was a choice in my deck, especially being able to draw it for turn still being active. And also good against Drytron, also good against Striker. While something like something like DD Crow is probably better against a deck like Drytron or something like Striker. I didn't want cards in my deck that could potentially be dead in various matchups, especially going across an 11-round tournament. And Crow is not good against Prank Kids. Crow is just not good against Tri-Brigade. And I expected a lot of those matchups, especially with something like Prank Kids, which is a difficult matchup. I don't want to play hand traps that pair poorly against that, because I'm going to have an even smaller win rate against those decks. So I felt Bell was probably just the best option out of like Bellmeister and Crow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as somebody who's been playing Tri-Brigade for a few months, this deck list is scary. It's like I have no idea how I would beat this unless I just opened absurdly well. It's like the usual plays don't do anything. Like Ancient Warrior and Oppo do nothing against this. You've got so much effect negation. Even if I did manage to get an Oppo up, you're still gonna negate my Revolt. Like I'm still gonna have trouble. Yeah, I think that this is very. If you expected a lot of Tri-Brigade, you definitely prepared for it. Because it's like, there's no clear path to victory here without siding. And so I think that's testament to good deck building.
Yeah. The best Tri-Brigade response I can see is if you open Revolt with a strike. I ended up losing a game. My only loss of the tournament was because my opponent opened Revolt Strike for my Bell specifically. So I lost the game as a result of that. But yeah, I just think unless if your opponent opens something like that specifically or opens Anti-Spell and Order games 2 and 3, my deck should not lose to that deck.
Right. I know there's a lot of buzz like in Tri-Brigade circles of playing like Avermax to try to put up something that at least does something that Oppo doesn't. As far as just like at least make Striker try to have to beat that. But I feel like even then, if you can just steal a Sure Egg, you've got the out.
Yeah, Shark Cannon, banish Avermax.
Right. So going on to side, we've got the Cycle Readers. I mean, that's pretty well established as anti-Drytron card. Goes along with the hand traps. Skullmeister, I think, is interesting. So obviously you're pretty well prepared for Tri-Brigade already. Why did you feel the need to play this Skullmeisters as well? Yeah,
so for my deck specifically, for something like Striker, I cannot play Droll and Lockbird, and I cannot really play Artifact Lancia. Because those cards are like turn-skipping hand traps. If I'm playing a deck that can OTK you or put up an unbreakable board, those turn-ending hand traps are good. But if my opponent knows I'm playing Striker, they know I can't kill them. So if they go Cyber Emergency and I Droll them and they go pass, right? The most I am doing is like Array with like maybe a cannon set or an anchor set. At that point, my opponent has 6 cards in hand. I lost a card with Droll and Lockbird because I ended up neg-1ing. I'm back where I started, and my opponent can just kill me again unless I open another Droll and Lockbird. So something like Cycle Reader, it's not a turn-ending hand trap, but if I resolve Cycle Reader, my opponent not only is going to like have very difficult times playing, they also just essentially lost 2 cards out of the deal. Being able to hit, I don't know, Alpha Benten or Alpha Zeta out of the graveyard is completely turn-ending for my opponent. For Skullmeister, this was initially different Dimension Ground, but something I decided was I just didn't have enough side for Prank Kids. Prank Kids is a deck that it's a 1-card engine that sees a lot of cards for like no investment and can set a lot of back row. And that's something that is difficult for me. While Battle Butler isn't really much of a problem, Battle Butler is a problem when they have 4 other back row and 3 cards in hand. So I wanted to play something like Skullmeister so that I could have a good edge in that matchup of being able to Meister a Prank Kids effect and have them having a high chance of just passing turn. There's also why something like Nibiru is in my main deck, something I didn't really touch on too much. But I had Nibiru at 2 versus 3 because I expected a lot of mirrors, and it's not very good in that mirror match. And I feel like Nibiru is probably the 5th best hand trap right now. And I just wanted to play 14, not 15. So I see Nibiru as like my 13th and 14th card instead of playing 2 copies of Nibiru. I normally like playing Nibiru at 0 or 3. So seeing it as 13th and 14th over like 2 Nibiru is something that I like seeing. And then again, Meister, mainly just for the Pranks matchup. Good against the Tri-Brigade matchup, hitting a Kid or a Fractal. It doesn't come in too often. It doesn't really come in at 3 against Tri-Brigade. At that point, I'm oversighting. I do bring it in against Drytron. I bring in 3 Cycle Reader, 3 Meister against Drytron. At that point, my deck is 20 hand traps. And if you think you can make a board against half of my deck literally being hand traps, go right ahead. It's just not happening. So yeah. And plus that 1700 deck, I killed my opponent because I had a lot of attack.
Yeah, he is a big boy. He's compared
17.
to the other hand traps.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying about you're forcing them to use their hard once per turn effects and then consuming those resources. And then even though it's in terms of actual card economy, it's like a neg-1. It's ultimately not because you're going to see more cards as a result of them not getting those plays off. And like kind of on the right track. Yeah. Being able to Skullmeister Nerval, which they send to graveyard off Fractal, is a 1-for-1 exchange. Right. Even Cycle Reader at the end of the day can be a 1-for-1 exchange because they're tributing a monster from your hand and then you're banishing it. Something like Droll is not a 1-for-1 exchange. It's only ever a 1-for-1 exchange if you chain it to like a Ben 10. And at that point, that's very risky to try and do. So yeah, I like the Cycle Reader. It was really good. That's the only card
in my side deck that's specifically for one matchup. And I feel like that's because that one matchup is my most difficult one.
And Cycle Rage of Tuner too, right? So you can
it's a level 3 tuner too. Yeah, it happens. It didn't happen at the tournament, but it can happen.
Yeah. So Cosmic and Twin, you said a minute ago about like prank kids being tough with back row. Is that kind of consistent? You just don't really feel like you perform well against back row decks?
So Twin and Cosmic, interestingly enough, aren't for back row decks. It's counter siding pretty much. Again, I think I beat every deck that's as fast or slower than me. I do not think I should lose to those decks ever. Yeah. The one exception to that is when they board in cards that make me automatically lose the game. And those big cards are Anti-Spell and Imperial Order. If my opponent resolves those cards and I don't have the answer, I lose the game, right? So I'm not playing things like Lightning Storm and Duster because I don't think I need to, because I beat the decks that those cards are really good against regardless. But something like Cosmic and Twin Twister are really good against specifically those outs that make me automatically lose the game. So if I resolve those cards and I stop my opponent from resolving those blowout cards, at that point, we're at the exact same position I am game 1, and I'm just going to beat you again.
So if you sniff that out, you put in all 6, basically. So it's just a non-factor.
Yeah, I sided against Tri-Brigade, Virtual World, Prank Kids, and Salamangrate. Any matchup that can play Anti-Spell and has to play Anti-Spell, I put in.
Gotcha. And then the last one, Shared Ride. That's for, I guess, combo. Max season.
So it's really good against a lot of decks that will make me go first, which happens quite often. Something like Dragon Link, or in the mirror match, something like Salamangreat, something like Drytron. They'll make me go first. And if I resolve a Shared Ride, you can try and kill me through me drawing 5 or 6 cards. I mean, you can go right ahead.
A lot of hand traps in there.
Yeah, it's a lot of hand traps. And the difference between Shared Ride and Droll is, Shared Ride, a lot of the times they'll just also pass. But the big difference is Shared Ride replaces itself. So if my opponent passes after I Shared Ride, I'm okay because I'm in the same amount of advantage as I was when I flipped that card. Where something like Droll, I'm starting on 5 cards instead of 6. That's one less card I could use to potentially break a board, and it's very inconsistent. Shared Ride is just, if you're playing the mirror and one person has Shared Ride and the other person doesn't, it's just night and day. One person is going to win that game. It doesn't really come in against a deck like Tri-Brigade, or decks that don't really search too much. If my opponent searches from deck or grave to hand usually 3 times a turn, that's usually the threshold where I put the Shared Ride in.
Makes sense. So extra deck, I feel like we can kind of ignore most of the Sky Striker cards. They speak for themselves. You play 3 ofs. The big ones, one of the kinda. One of Zeke. So you mentioned Zeke's Banish Effect. Where does that come up?
So Zeke's Banish Effect comes up when my opponent has a lot of disruptions, or I have disruptions in my hand, but I don't want to commit those cards to the field just yet. So previously I mentioned a Chain Block Kagari with Rose, right? That's such a strong play because if I go Chain Link 2 or Chain Link 1 Kagari, Chain Link 2 Rose, if they try and if they don't negate the Rose, at that point I'm getting my Kagari back. Then I'm making a Zeke. I'm forcing you to use another negate. Then I can use the spell that I added back as another negate, basically using only 1 card. So Zeke comes in a lot there. It comes in the mirror match all of the time. Again, banishing a Link monster. It comes back in their main monster zone, so all of their cards are turned off. It can proc an Area 0, which can help when you're trying to make an access code to kill your opponent. When you can't get to tuner access to use a Halp combo. It can just be big, 2,500 attack if you use the effect to proc. There was a specific game against a Drytron player when I had about the same amount of cards in hand as they had negates. But the one thing that saved me was they were playing Perfection and not Ultimateness, so they had Perfection on the field. I can go Chain Link 1 Kagari, Chain Link 2 Rose. They had to negate the Rose. I add back my Shark Cannon, activate Shark Cannon, forced to use a negate there, and then I can make a Zeke with another monster in my hand. Just use another negate, and then a Ray Trigger. It just eats so much negates when you have disruption in your extra deck to be able to use for your opponent, even if it's just till the end of their turn. Because at that point, the damage is already done. I didn't die that turn, right? I was able to continue with my plays. You can't use that card until your next turn.
Mm-hmm.
I can keep a monster that I want to anchor and just safe in the banish pile until I need it for next turn. It has a lot of good practical applications for it.
So I see we have the Accesscode combo here.
Yeah.
We don't have to go into detail about that. I'll throw what the combo is up on the screen in case anybody doesn't know it. How often did that come up for you?
A lot. It comes up a lot. Because, a lot of people who haven't played against Striker since the beginning of 2020 have a lot of false assumptions about how Striker is played now. One of them being that Droll and Lockbird is good against my deck. It's not. It's very much not. I every time I got Drolled, I won. Because my opponent was just down a card which does nothing. And then another big assumption is that I can't kill you anymore. Sure, I probably can't kill you turn 1, but if I have a Hayate poke, you're always in death range at 65 now. Have any Striker link plus a Shark Cannon or a normal summon hand trap is 5,300 damage. At that point, I just need a normal summon, one more Striker, get one more Striker on the field for a Hayate, and you're looking at 6,800 there. Even more if you go to Kagari with a few spells engraved, to put you to like upwards of 7,000 damage. So people just don't expect that of an Accesscode pop 5 card summon game. It's so explosive compared to what it used to be. And the Accesscode package, I know it's expensive, but it's such an important part of the deck now. I know people are playing Prosperity. Some people are testing it without the Accesscode package. And while I think Prosperity increases your consistency by like a couple percentage points, because you're seeing one more card than something like Desires is, you're losing such a important combo in your deck to just like kill your opponent, or to just completely disrupt your opponent off of almost nothing, just a Shark Cannon, which is a meh card at best. Being able to revive an opponent's Ash and then just turning that into a 5,300 just game is ridiculous.
So is that usually the setup? You're reviving an opponent's card versus normal summoning one of your own?
Yeah, most decks in the game right now play some form of tuner. Drytron plays Orange Lay and Diviner. Tri-Brigade play a ton of hand traps. They play Bell, they play Ash, they play those kinds of cards. The Mirror Match obviously plays a lot of hand traps. Silent plays only a little bit. So that's the only one matchup where it doesn't always happen unless if they have the Ash in their hand. But yeah, it's almost usually a Shark Cannon opponent's hand trap and then going from there.
And then the last card, Ningirsu, that's seen play for a while, but did this come up very often?
So I did not summon Ningirsu one time throughout the event, but just because I didn't summon it doesn't mean that I think it was incorrect to play. A lot of the times I look at cards in my deck for like those kind of flex spots, and I look at a card not on its power level, but can this card make me win in a losing situation? And I feel Ningirsu is the best card to do that right now. If my opponent is playing something like Dragoon, or they're playing something that I just cannot normally out, if I'm not playing Ningirsu in my deck, that means I'm losing to like a card or a deck that I shouldn't normally be losing to.
Right.
So I want to have that insurance to make sure that I'm not just losing to something completely random. Something like Nightmare Phoenix is the big one that a lot of people say that you should play over Ningirsu, primarily for Imperial Order. Where that is true, if my opponent flips Order on me game 1, I'm almost always going to lose. That actually didn't happen in round 2 because I had Infirm and then waited a turn. So you have some outs, but you're almost always just going to lose. Or if you have something like Nightmare Phoenix, you can keep playing by popping an Imperial Order. But there are two things wrong with that. One, nobody just has Imperial Order. They usually have other cards, right? So if they have an Imperm or they have a Strike for your Phoenix, you're just losing anyway, right? And then additionally, you're building your deck around an unsearchable one-of, right? Games 2 and 3, it's more understandable. But you have things like Cosmic and Twin to beat, right? If my opponent happens to open their unsearchable one-of, sure, they're just better than me. I'll take that loss, and I'll try and beat you in games 2 and 3. But I don't want to build my deck around cards that I will see in like 8% of games.
Right.
It doesn't seem mathematically correct for me. So I like Ning over Nightmare Phoenix.
Yeah, I like the idea that you said of it's going to win you games that you weren't going to win normally. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's go through. I don't know if you know this off the top of your head. What were your matchups during the weekend?
I don't know 100% of like my round by round matchups, but I played.
We can chat now.
2 Drytron.
was gonna do was
Actually, I think I played 3 Drytron. 2 Mirrors, 3 or 4 Tri-Brigade. I played a Plunder Patrol. That was kind of funny. I played an ABC and at like round 8, I think. It was something. Wow. Yeah, it was something late. So, you know, it's a mixture of like, you know, those random decks that you'll see at a YCS in the early rounds with like meta. So, and I played a couple Dragon Link. So like overall, like my prediction of what I would play was pretty largely correct. It reflected in my record because you know, every deck that I expected to play against, I beat. Mine is just 1 round, which again, it's a variance. You know, you can't win 100% of the games in the card game. But I mean, yeah, it was a bunch of the meta, and then I just think my deck like beats most of the meta, which is as I'm playing just something super out there.
Did you have the 2-round buy, or did you play every round?
I did not have the 2-round buy.
Oh, very nice.
Which I noticed that in the later rounds, everyone I played against had 2-round buys. Around 7, 8, 10, all those people had 2-round buys. Which I think I actually am happy I didn't have the 2-round buy, because I had those couple rounds to get a good feel on how to play this YCS, this remote duel at round 1 versus something like round 3. And just having that a little bit of experience, and just like, you know, I'm a little rusty when it comes to tournaments still. I don't know, we've been to a couple, but you know, getting the tournament mindset and having those 2-round buffer, I felt was really good for me personally. So that by the time round 3 came up, I was in the zone and I was good to start playing again.
Yeah, makes sense. When did you drop your first match?
I dropped my first match round 10.
Okay, so you started.
So yes, I finished
9-0 and then.
I think it was 8-0. I think it was 8 rounds. So I finished first in my division. I think I was in Group G, and then I won round 9, and then I dropped the first 2 round 10. Who's currently the guy I lost to is currently first in Swiss still. So,
so kind of wrapping up, how did you feel about the format of the remote duel? I mean, I know this is the longest remote duel event that they've had. Did you enjoy it? Is it something that you think you'd do again?
So I think my experience had been more positive than most. You know, my internet connection is pretty okay. But I know a lot of people just didn't have that luxury. And a lot of people got, you know, disconnects and, you know, game losses for like losing like a couple seconds on your camera, right? And, you know, you can probably handle this. Most computers can handle Discord, but the problem is when you're using Discord for like 10 hours, there's obviously going to be hiccups. So you're kind of rolling the die. I was like, am I going to have a hiccup when I'm playing a round, or am I going to have a hiccup when I'm waiting for the round? And some people just don't like that roulette. And then additionally, I never really felt that I was playing against any kind of opponent that was trying to cheat me, like with specifically like because of remote duels. I know some people also felt that their opponents were like cheating them, and, you know, maybe caught them cheating or things like that. That didn't happen to me personally. But I feel like myself and all my opponents were pretty honest when it came to that. I know some people, you just can't control that. You know, you can't control who you're playing against. You know, I had a game loss, or I got a game loss for a disconnect at like round 4 or 5 because I had a brownout at home, right? So, you know, you basically just had to assume going into the event that you're probably going to get a loss that's going to be completely out of your control through like connection issues. But overall, I think the tournament ran really well. It ran really fine. You know, I think it's the best alternative we have to in-person events. And, you know, I still got tournament jitters. I still got, you know, being able to look at other people's tables to see what they're playing, you know, spectating. I still got those kinds of experiences. And I enjoyed that. But I understand and empathize with the people that didn't have as positive an experience that I did.
Gotcha. Well, all right. Well, this was quite a marathon. I appreciate all your insight. I mean, I think we were saying before we started that there hasn't really been a guide like this done for Sky Striker recently. And I thought that, especially with your experience with the deck and, you know, your success here, that this would be a good opportunity to kind of introduce people to the new look and the new style of play. Yeah. So I think we definitely did that. We went into a lot of depth about how the gears turn in here and how it compares to the rest of the meta. Where do you think you would place this as far as power level in the meta?
It's a very, very unique deck to do that with. Because the conversion rate for this deck is very low. So this deck has one of the highest ceilings ever in any deck, but the problem is it also has one of the lowest floors if you just don't know how to play it. So I think it's completely pilot dependent, in my opinion. So I think if you're a really good pilot with Striker, it can be the best deck of the format. But if you're just not well versed with the deck, or you just haven't played it before, or you don't know how to play this new version of Striker with Rose, with One Engage, with Zeke, with those kinds of stuff, you can very much like not even be in like rogue status. So it's very, very volatile where to put it exactly. I think if you want to average it, it's probably a tier 2 if you grab all of the best players and all the worst players together. So, the Tri-Brigade and Drytron are probably better than it. It's probably about as the same power level as something like Invoked. But again, it's very, very pilot dependent.
Right. I think that's kind of what we saw from the conversion rate, where it just dropped off dramatic. I think we had it was the second highest played deck in North America, and then we only had 4 people in top 32.
Yeah, and I looked at the top 32 with South America, Europe, and North America, and of that top 96, there was 5 Striker players, and 4 of them are from the US. So it's one of those decks where if you've been playing the deck for a very long time, you can see the fruits of your labor with the deck. But if you just pick up the deck and you don't put the hours into it, you're going to have a very difficult time, because there are sometimes when you see hands in this deck and you're like, I don't know how to play this hand. I don't know how to navigate through my opponent's board. I don't know how to properly use my disruptions. And when you can't do that, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage going second. So when you don't know how to navigate through boards and you're by default going second and you're playing on hard mode, you're just not going to be able to win matches.
So is that the best piece of advice you think you could give somebody trying to pick up this deck, is just grind as much as possible?
Yeah, just put in the hours. And I think Striker benefits a lot from goldfishing. You can goldfish with combo decks, and you can even goldfish with something like a mid-range deck. But I think Striker is very unique when you goldfish, because a lot of your hands are going to look a lot different, especially with One Engage. That's like, my hand might be, Ray, Anchor, Afterburner, Desire, something like that going second. I don't have any hand traps. But then what's the best way to navigate through my cards specifically, try and disrupt all of my opponent's stuff so that I can be able to play and I'm able to commit my monsters. And there are some times when you just don't open Ray. You have to think, okay, how can I plan through my disruptions to potentially see 1 extra draw, to potentially see maybe 2 extra turns, to just try and see that your main starter. And those are things that goldfishing can really benefit with. And then again, just grinding on Dueling Book or something like Yugioh Pro, or just going to locals with it. It's probably just the best way to do it. Yeah. And then once you do that, you can start going to the tournament, going to bigger tournaments, because having to play honest for 9 or 10 rounds can be very, very mentally taxing if you've never done that before. So, if you've played Striker, on Dueling Book or whatever, it's a lot different when you're playing Striker for a 9-round tournament, for a 10-round tournament, for an 11-round tournament, because in those later rounds, you're tired and you're not going to be able to play it 100% all of the time. So you need to get those hands and different kind of interactions down to just muscle memory, so you can play through those later rounds.
So they say in basketball, you practice free throws tired, so that at the end of the game, you can sink them without thinking. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, all right, Nick, congratulations on your second YCS top.
Yeah, thank you.
I believe I have that correct. Yeah, and sorry you didn't get to go any further, and we're not able to see you on the stream, but I'm sure you'll be back. I think when things open up and we get some real events, I think you'll be somebody to watch.
Yeah, shout out to my my teammate Sebastian Todd for making top 16.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking forward to seeing him in a couple weeks. Hopefully he can take it. I won't give away what he's playing, but I think he's a favorite to win, I think. Yeah,
Florida really showed out for that. I think.
Oh yeah,
Bobby Kenny was.
Yeah, Bobby Kenny also got top 16. Jeremy got top 32. He also got snuffed, unfortunately.
Who else was in there from Florida? I saw somebody. I can't remember who. Oh, it escapes me right now. But I know there were at least 2 or 3 other Florida people who I saw in there. So that's awesome. I think we've definitely got a burgeoning Yu-Gi-Oh community down here. A lot of really talented players. So, all right. Well, Nick, appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on to do this with me. And, hopefully we'll be able to do it again real soon.
Yep. In person, maybe?
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Now that things are a little bit easier to do that with. So, especially I'm looking forward to Thursday with the first tournament coming back.
Oh, yeah. Are you going to Oblivion?
Yeah, planning on it. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Gotta show how bad I am at dry trunk.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, again, thanks for your time. You've been very generous, and thank you all for watching. I hope this was helpful to you, and you feel like you have a good grip on how to play the modern striker deck. Make sure if you have somebody who you think would benefit from seeing this, please consider sharing it with them. Please consider subscribing. I try to do really high effort content like this, long form stuff, so that we can all get better at the game. So please consider supporting the channel. And yeah, that's it. See you next time.